Mhm. All right, welcome to the Leadership Academy's book club number 4. It's actually session 5 because one book was so interesting we did it over 2 sessions. But this one we're talking about a book called Reinventing Organizations. And let me share my screen and then we can kick things off. There we go. So we were reading the book Reinventing Organizations by Fredric Laloux. And I've set up a board here where we can jointly take notes, drop in any thoughts that you have about the book or the discussion we're having today. Just as a high level overview, hold on, let me copy the board link so people can actually get in and do their work. So bear with me, my computer is super slow. While I'm getting set up, maybe if anybody has any initial thoughts, did you love the book? Did you hate the book? Feel free to jump in right now while I get this set up. Actually, it might be a good.
I might just say that I originally found the book from I think it was Audible and downloaded it, was all excited, but then it was in French, so I couldn't listen to the book. And so I read parts of it and got really deeply engaged in it. But then I found that you can get it, and just everybody should know, you can get it in English from the Audible or directly from the Laloux website. You can download and pay for it directly there. So that's how I got an audio version of it.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, there is on the website itself, you can purchase the book, but they also have a pay what you can model, and they allow you to download both versions of the book. There's a detailed 380-page book. There's also a much simpler 170-page illustrated kind of simplified version. And you can download both of those for free. And once you've read it and think it's valuable, they invite you through a PayPal link to pay what you can or pay what you want. So I think that's a really great model. I've just put the Miro link into chat. So if you want to hop on the board, you can do so there. You should all now have editing abilities. And thanks, Zoe. She's dropped in the home page for Reinventing Organizations. Any other thoughts just to kick us off on how you found the book? Or maybe who's read the book and who is here wanting to find out more?
Maybe you could give a really quick overview for those who didn't read.
Okay. So the book has 3 primary sections. The first section looks at kind of the past and present organizational models that it identifies using its model, which is not to say it's an exact map of what things are, but it's one lens through which to look at things. And then it goes into this kind of new level that seems to be emerging that it's calling teal. And so that's the center section of this board. And then it really gets into the emergence of teal organizations. And there's case studies through the books of 12 or more different companies that seem to be embodying some of these practices and really implementing them in action. So it actually had a lot of great examples of things that worked, things that didn't. And there were a lot of things in there that kind of seem to echo some of the things that I'm seeing happening in a decentralized blockchain space too. So I definitely wanted to get some thoughts from people on what they thought about the book and how it might apply. So that was a general overview. And I put some notes here on the board, just kind of describing some of the topics. So we can do that section by section. So why don't we jump in? So in the section on the past, present organizational models, it really talked about a bunch of different kind of worldviews. And I just put the 4 latest ones in here. There's more, but it talked about what was called the impulsive worldview, and it ties that into kind of, just for simplicity, the color red. The conformist worldview is called amber. The achievement worldview is labeled orange, and the pluralistic worldview is green. And the book just talks about, within this model, kind of looking at the different breakthroughs in human organization that happened at each of these stages. And in the red impulsive model, the big breakthrough was the division of labor into different ways of doing labor, into some form of specialization or division of that. And the number 2 breakthrough was top-down authority. So somebody got to decide what to do. And so that was kind of red impulsive. Out of that grew kind of the amber conformist, which the 2 breakthroughs that the book talks about there are, it created replicable processes and stable organization charts. And today, most organizations are some mix of amber, orange, green, and no organization is a pure color per se. There are different elements of these, but this is kind of just a very broad simplification to help think about certain ways of looking at organizational models. So currently today, some predominantly amber organizations might be the military, religious institutions, or schools, where they really rely on replicable processes, checklists, rules, and then stable organization charts. So you know the hierarchy. And one of the benefits of this is that there's a lot of stability, there's a lot of predictability, there's a lot of the emotional safety there, because you know that things in the world are a certain way. And then the next level that it talks about is the achievement worldview, which it labels as orange. And this one had 3 breakthrough innovations that the book mentions. And this would be innovation, accountability through the tracking of metrics and different things, KPIs, things like that. And breakthrough number 3 is meritocracy, where there isn't necessarily a stable hierarchy of things, but it's more based on merit. Anybody can raise up to different levels based on their abilities. And really, orange is about achievement and productivity and stuff like that. And it's kind of way of looking at organizations. Our organizations are machines, and each one of us is some cog in that machine. And it's a beautiful kind of clockwork mechanism. And the book also goes into orange in particular, has some shadows. Through this worldview, it doesn't have any checks or balances really on things like, if it's achievement oriented and profit motivated, then it sees the world and itself as machines to optimize, and it leads to over optimization or maximizing shareholder value, and that has negative impacts on the environment or on social issues. Or we're seeing like all the wealth accumulates into the top 1% of the 1%. So that's kind of, it talks a little bit about the shadows of orange. Even though it has these breakthroughs, when orange runs rampant, it leads into a lot of potential issues that we're seeing in the world. And then the next worldview that it talks about is the pluralistic or green worldview. And the breakthroughs here were around empowerment, values-driven culture, and shareholder or stakeholder value. So stakeholder value really goes beyond shareholder value, which was kind of one of the things for orange, and really goes from shareholders to stakeholders. And the stakeholders can include the shareholders, but it also includes employees. It includes your customer, includes society, environment, the community. So really looking at how do you support and take care of all of the stakeholders as part of your organization. And its model moves from organizations as machines to organizations as families. So it really humanizes organizations and looks at it from a human level. So those were kind of the high level models that the first part of the book goes through. And somebody here has posted a nice chart. Oh, and just so that you know, for the book club, there's a space down here where I invite you to drop any links to resources, articles, YouTube videos, whatever you found that may relate and be useful. Totally welcome here. I found a critique of the book. So this was kind of, we can get really over involved in having this resonate and getting all excited, but it's often useful to look at a critical kind of look at this. So this is one that I found where they talk, is teal the new black? Probably not. And there's a really great argument there on the model and stuff like that. But I just wanted to make sure that we have a balanced opportunity here to look at things. So I dropped some stuff in here, but there's also other articles of interest that I started to put in. And somebody on the Telegram group dropped a link to Noon Universe, which looks like it's a science fiction book that talks about a lot of the topics in the summary of the book sound a lot like teal organizations, and it kind of calls in, there's a lot of possible similarities to communism. So I thought that was interesting. So I threw that in there as well. So that is the first part of the book, is the past and present organizational models that it's presenting. And then it starts to talk about, there seems to be a new level emerging, which is called teal. And we'll get into that for the next section, but I'll open it up here, I guess, for discussion and creating discussion notes. What do people think about the model? Does it resonate? Is it a bunch of bunk? I think this will be a really interesting conversation here. And I'm kind of sharing the screen, so feel free to raise hands and jump in order. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, my feeling about this is that it's an extraordinarily thoughtful and useful approach toward, starting to organize ourselves in ways that we haven't been used to as humans. I mean, the only really large top-down organizations have been hierarchical ones in, religion, military, and corporations, even as this kind of top-down approach. And I think this is a first, and it's still evolving, but there are several, like holacracy and sociocracy and this teal model are kind of evolving, but I think they encompass a lot of the old models into the new model, and that you kind of extend it a little bit. I think there's a little invention going on around here. I'm really excited about the teal and holacracy models because I'm working with people who are developing the UI elements for DAOs using this methodology. And there's some really great work that's been done that I'm trying to incorporate into stuff we do with DAOs and Cardano, but it's really based totally on this model, and it's a great experimental environment. There's still a lot of work to be done to resolve and make these into the real tools we need in the future.
Thanks, Dan. Chakan.
Oh, hi. So I absolutely love this book. The moment I saw it, the ideas in this book, I just saw it applies so well to the space, to decentralization. The principles it mentions in the second part of the book, self-management, wholeness, evolutionary purpose, I think just apply very well. Especially we can start with the practical first breakthrough, self-management. I think it's absolutely necessary when we collaborate in this space. So I think it resonated with me quite well. We kind of took it on at Littlefish, and we're just building on top of it, building business processes from the ideas that are in this book. But really, when I first read the book, some ideas they didn't really come out at me. The green pluralistic vision, for example, I failed to see it in the world. Maybe I can start to see it very little by little. Maybe stakeholder values, they're coming alive in the past 3 to 5 years in some businesses, but orange, I see it everywhere. Amber, I think it's quite obvious, but I'm kind of trying to understand the green side of things and how it connects to the next level, the teal. So I'm trying to put the ideas to their place, but I'm still trying at that part.
That's a great point. Coming from Amazon myself, I see Amazon is a really strongly orange kind of culture around innovation, accountability, meritocracy. But it is starting to grow into the green space. There are things in place around empowerment and values-driven culture around the Amazon leadership principles. They still haven't gotten very far into number 3 with stakeholder value. They're starting to look at that, and it's starting to take hold. But really, it's very strongly orange still. But there are parts of this where employees are empowered to make decisions. If it's a two-way door, they want you to move very quickly. And they're trying to build that culture out, and they have a very strong values-driven culture in place. So I see green in a lot of organizations starting to come out that way. But I'd love to hear what other people see about these different levels. Newman, you have your hand up.
Yeah, following up with that. And it's interesting that Chaka sees and like what we resonate with or what we can see and what's clear to us, I think is interesting. And when I read, I was like, oh, you can get it. And sometimes it's a little harder to discern. The organizations as machines is kind of that mechanistic universe, the mechanistic worldview, where like if something's broken, you just change out the part and stick in a new part. And if you've ever worked on a car, you're like, oh, or you've gone to a mechanic and they change out your battery and you keep blowing through batteries and you find out that it's your alternator, and they kind of giggle. They're like, oh, we got 3 batteries out of them, you know? But my question to the group is, what is a family? Because the green is what I kind of have trouble seeing, like Chakan. And I think it's because I'm stuck in it. Like it's the air that it's the water that I'm swimming in. So what is the difference between a family worldview and a mechanistic machine worldview? That's my question.
Mm-hmm.
Does that resonate with anyone?
I have some thoughts, but Zoe's got her hand up.
Yeah.
What do you think, Zoe?
My point will be about something else, so you can please go ahead.
That's fine. Maybe it'll percolate and just sort of, it's just it's sort of rhetorical at the moment. But I am kind of curious as to like, okay, yeah, the family structure, and then moving on, because I think that evolution and progression, But go ahead, Zoe, please.
Okay. I just one concern that comes up for me is with the term family. I mean that, of course, the model has advantages and stuff, but if it's, I feel like there is a critical point, and that is if this family or understanding of it as family, if that is top down, it is very dangerous. I feel. Yeah, that's my concern.
So, Nin, and then Steve.
Hey guys, sorry I didn't read the book. I tried to download it, but then somehow I needed OneDrive. Newman, I would say probably from a machine, right? If you have a part that's not working or not performing in the right way, you just replace it, right? So people get fired and replaced from an organization or a company. From a family, it's, because it is culture driven and everyone is a stakeholder and family member, it is a little bit harder to replace a family member. Some could even say kind of irreplaceable, right? Imagine replacing your family member. You may not talk to them as much, right? Kind of like have healthy boundaries and distance, but no matter what, they're always going to be part of the family, even if someone decides you are no longer part of the family. You're excommunicado, as they say. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, right? Do we need to have the flexibility to, to let go of people and hire new people? Or do we have, as an organization, right? Or do we have like lifelong commitments to some of our team members? And usually at a startup, the way it works is the core team is green, right? But as the startup grows, the rest of the company is orange.
Thanks, Nin. Those are great observations. And I think that is kind of the key here is organizations as machines, everybody inside is a replaceable cog if it breaks or is not functioning correctly. And they really look at performance. And if you don't perform, you're out. They top grade, they downgrade, they have a churn of people, they have performance reviews. But organizations as families that I've seen are the stronger ones, where when you get hired, you're there as long as you want to be there. If it's not working out, they believe that you have value and they'll find another opportunity for you somewhere in the company, or they'll train you up, or they'll find some way to bring you some value so that you can contribute. And but they're also very careful who they bring in, because they know whoever comes in is going to be part of the family, and we're going to take care of them. So yeah, so that's kind of what I've seen there emerge as far as the green stuff. Steve, and then Seamus.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot more flexible in what I think of as my family, as I've gotten older, particularly the last 20, 25 years, and a lot of that kind of happened, as I dealt, when I was younger, dealt with the things I was angry about with my family. When I look at, as I got older and I could look at my blood family in the context of who they actually were and what they actually came up in, I couldn't be so mad at them, right? They just were who they were in the situations they were in, and I just have to let go of that shit, right? Because they didn't know any better, and they've even, in a lot of those types of issues, they've kind of grown into their own realization about what they did as parents, as brother and sister to me, and that's, we're all cool with that. That said, even though I have a great relationship with my family, they don't talk to me about me. They just talk to me about the shit they want to talk about. Like they don't, when Kelly and I go hang out with my family, we have a great time. But do they ask us how it's going or what we're doing, or how is Cardano community work going? They could give a fuck. I mean, literally, even though, some of them have invested in Cardano, they don't want to hear about what this is, and so on that level, because this is such a large part of my life, I have feelings of family with the people that I'm really closely working with in the community, and that I don't want them to feel bad about anything, right? Because I know what their real passion is, what their intent is with their time. And so I'm supportive of them in the same way I am with my partner, Kelly. You know, it's like, just talk to me and tell me what you need, and I'm going to try to help you out. You know, like that's like real family for me. And, you know, my experience with corporations, you know, try to talk that family shit though is, you know, that that's usually kind of like code for you'll work for less here, you know, because we're your family. And you know, and a lot of people in the Cardano community kind of feel that way about, you know, our incentivization and everything. It's kind of just like tokens, you know, like, and I don't mean to make fun of the word. I just mean it's not a lot of money, at least so far. But you know, like we're still early. You know, I mean, it is true. You know, like if you understand why we're testing and why we're incentivizing at testing levels of financial reward, and your personal situation allows you to stay in and put this time in, you know, like we're all going to be okay, right? Because we really are still early. You know, it's just a matter of really trying to finish having these conversations, you know, before the real value starts to, you know, get established and captured, you know, wherever that is. I'll be quiet. I'm rambling.
Thanks, Steve. CMOS.
I don't know about the book, but I've, in a past life, I was in working e-commerce marketing and analytics in-house for a handful of different brands for a long time. So I've seen organizations succeed and fail in a lot of contexts. And what I see often is that the people responsible for modifying or shepherding the organization sometimes fail to realize that one of the most consistent, reliable things this universe has is human behavior. People are going to be people, and your organization somehow needs to continue to evolve for contingencies that are inevitable. Yeah, I've seen a lot of times otherwise perfectly good gears be put into a framework that was set up for them to fail, to break down early. So, you know, while it's important to fire people when you have good reason to fire them, that could also perhaps in some cases indicate there's something about your hiring process or some other mechanism of the system that's not working as well, especially if you've had to go through several people, you know, quickly in the same role.
Very good points. And something I should mention that's part of this model is it kind of goes through these evolutions from the different breakthroughs from red, amber, orange, green. Each stage doesn't replace the previous stage. It extends and embraces the previous stage, or extends and includes. So it takes the previous stage along, but it extends it into these new breakthroughs, but it doesn't lose necessarily the stuff that was happening before. It may soften it, it may change how it manifests, and things like that, but it doesn't wholesale throw away the previous stages kind of breakthroughs. It'll modify them in a new way and expand upon them, which is, so that's why there's no pure green organization or pure orange or pure yellow. They blend because of this kind of extend and embrace kind of evolutionary model, at least as far as this kind of model thinking goes. That's kind of one of the I guess hypotheses that has been put forth. Newman.
And one of the criticisms of these kind of models, I mean, we're dealing with a living system, and not just a living system, but a living system of systems of individuals and whole people. So it's much messier than this. And that's something that rereading this material, I kind of became clear to me. And in the book, they talked about the doctor who's at work, and when she gets home, and at work she's in this one model, and maybe it was one of the nurses that was in the teal organization, and then when she came home she kind of had to shift into a different model, like being a mom, maybe, you know, the organizational, like she maybe went from green to orange, or, you know, like at different times. And for instance, family dynamics, you know, like that, Ram Dass says, like, oh, if you think you're enlightened, you know, try spending a week at home with your parents, you know, and you're like, oh, right. So it's all happening, everything at once, at all the time, you know, everything all at the same time. So that was a sort of a breakthrough with me, and that it's not like any of them are bad, you know, they're all very good. And I think that was another point about like the best expression of orange, the best expression of red, like how to embrace those, and then like everything levels up at the same time.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Everything brings something to the table if you assume that everyone is there to help or to do good works. And yeah, so I think each level does have definitely good things that it brings, and they should be embraced. Maybe that's a good segue into teal. You mentioned a few things here that are pretty interesting, and then I'll give Steve a chance to go. But just to briefly introduce some of the structures and practices and cultures of teal organizations. Teal is called evolutionary worldview, and it comes with 3 fundamental breakthroughs, at least as defined by this book. And the breakthrough number 1 is self-management. Breakthrough number 2 is wholeness. Breakthrough number 3, evolutionary purpose. And it moves from organization as machines to organization as families to organizations as living organisms, as kind of the mental picture of that thing. And it sees the world not as a machine or a family, but for a place for individual and collective unfolding. So it really brings everything back to people. And I just made some notes. Some of the key parts of self-management is taming the ego and realizing that one's ego can be kind of set aside and opening up to greater possibility outside of yourself. The yearning for wholeness is the breakthrough number 2, and that's where Neiman was talking a little bit about the nurse who came home and had to put on a different mask. Teal organizations realize that we are whole, complete people, and they encourage and try to develop structures where you can show up without having to put on a mask or leave part of yourself behind. You can bring your whole self to work. And maybe that changes the definition of what work really is, but really looking for how do we bring the whole person in, so that people are totally unfettered to kind of unfold in the way they need to and contribute to society. And then the evolutionary purpose is really inner rightness as a compass rather than rules, values, KPIs, metrics. So that's kind of some of the newer teal-y stuff that was discussed in the book. But Steve, let's continue.
Yeah, I really, I like this. I actually just got the book a day or 2 ago from in the mail, but I haven't read it yet. This, you know, in the green, you know, Newman mentioned pluralism. You know, I think it's really interesting, you know, for me in my life, you know, to kind of like have been, you know, more or less awake for the last 40 years, you know, in terms of like being an adult and paying attention to the process of technological innovation, you know, and that, you know, like when I was a kid, you know, there wasn't any thought about pluralism or anything like that, you know, because we didn't see it, you know, we didn't see how people live. But, you know, for, you know, well over 20 years now, you can see anybody in any part of the world. Basically, you can look at the other cultures. You know, we know there are different people living differently, and we know how, you know, like if you're in a Western nation, you kind of know from seeing these people in other cultures, how we've kind of screwed them over or marginalized them or shoved them off to the side. And so just the awareness of that, you know, at some point for people who live in a space of, you know, fair-mindedness is optimal. You know, you get motivated to change things. And that was what kind of hit me about Cardano, right? Was that there were these young guys, they had grown up with the internet and they grew up with, you know, that history that the mass media doesn't tell you about, they were aware of. You know, it was about 6 or 7 years ago, I had a conversation with my son, and he's a pretty young guy then, and I was surprised how much of the history that had made an impact on me by learning about it as an adult, he already knew, right? And he's starting his adult life understanding, you know, how colonialism happened for the last 100 years and how that's kind of been unfair and wealth has not been distributed fairly. And he doesn't have to figure that out, and, you know, until he's 40 before he can actually do something with it. He can do something with it right now. And, you know, to speak to this teal space that the book describes, you know, even that part, you know, in my life, you know, since we've had dogs, which is a new thing in my life, and I walk dogs at night in Alabama in the summertime. And I'll just tell you something that just freaked me out for a while until I got used to it. But if I take a flashlight with me and walk with the dogs, and I shine the light in the air around me in front of my face, just point it up, the number of creatures floating around in the air, these tiny, tiny, tiny things that I would need a microscope to actually see, but I can see they're motivating, right? These are real creatures floating in the air. I'm fucking breathing that shit, you know? And that's just like freaked me out for a while. I mean, you know, like the first time it started to dawn on me was like going out, you know, and it looked like there was just dew all over the grass, but I knew because of the humidity in the air, it wasn't dew, you know, like all these little twinkling little lights on the grass. And I go out to investigate them. It's fucking spiders, man. There must have been 1 billion spiders in front of the house. And that just freaked me out too, because how do I walk, right? How do I walk without killing these animals? How is it that I can breathe, you know? And I had to, you know, to deal with that, to not turn into an obsessive, freaked out, scared person. You know, I really embrace the idea that the whole earth is an organism, right? And there is no escaping. You know, there's not just Steve, and then there's all those bacteria and viruses out there external to me, right? They really are inside, you know, just as much as like I can't avoid breathing in a bug if I walk around here at night. You know, it's going to happen, and that reinforces then the stuff that I do in this community. Right, you know, because we're all necessary, and there's got to be some way to find space for everybody, right? Because there's space for everything else. There has to be space for that here, and that will, you know, just having that as a base level awareness will make you act differently in a business situation. I can tell you, because it's a new thing in my life that I even think these things. And it's changed the way I am in this community. So,
Steve, that's a beautiful sharing. And
Hey guys, I was just reading the mirror board and I just wanted to share. So there's this organization called Animas Valley Institute, and they focus on helping people, you know, achieve wholeness, find their purpose, their inner purpose, right? Inner rightness as a compass. And it goes through, there's a lot of like psyche and psychology involved, and it's a whole framework. I can put it in the chat, but you know, there I took some classes, right? And there I learned that in order to really have a company that fosters true, or organization that fosters true belonging, you have to first know and belong yourself, like where you belong in the world, to realize that, you know, the world is beautiful, magnificent, and vast and huge, right? And find your own purpose and a common purpose. And in discovering, you know, they call it the mythopoetic image that of what you're meant to do, and that truly fulfills you, then you would be able to kind of accept and even help guide others to the same place. Yeah, it is, you know, the role for a place for individuals in collective unfolding. It's always an adventure. It's taming the ego, right? It's building, actually, they call it the 3D ego, right? Where you encompass and partner with, you know, all the different I would say, forgot the word that they use, but I would say all the different parts of yourself into wholeness, and developing good strategies on how to be a more mature human being, right? So, yeah, I don't know if it relates, but that's something that kind of got from just reading the board.
Beautiful. If you haven't yet, feel free to drop that into the resource section underneath. I'm sure there's a lot of people that would be interested. And one thing I picked up almost without exception, maybe without exception, all the organizations studied in the book had specific training programs on teal kind of stuff, because a lot of it doesn't come naturally, or we haven't had training in it in previous green, orange, amber organizations. And they had things like every employee went through courses on conflict management and how to work together, really looking at taming the ego and nonviolent communication, things like that. They had things for self-management, because a lot of people step in without any clue how to self-manage. They come from a world where some manager, boss, or team decides what to do and tells them, here's your assignments, and they feel lost without any mechanisms to learn how to self-manage, how to manage time, how to plan things, how to do all that kind of stuff as well. And I think the wholeness part is also useful training that a lot of these organizations had, where how do you drop the masks? How do you make it safe to show up as you are and be welcome into a space? And the evolutionary purpose was another one that I found really interesting. It talks about the organization itself as a thing with the organization itself has a future that it wants to become. And it's not really each individual purpose trying to decide what that is, but to tap into the collective egregor that's forming and kind of figure out what's the evolutionary purpose that the organization itself wants to become. And then how do you help that? It's kind of a lot of this is kind of flipping things on its head kind of moments for me. And that was a big one too, where a lot of people are thinking about making plans. We could do this, we could do that. And they kind of try to create structure and push towards a goal, where in teal, it really talks about deep listening and sensing and saying, where are we trying to go as an organization, and trying to uncover those things, because that stuff is there. And there are practices and tools. It mentions things like open spaces and Theory U and ULab as tools that can help kind of get to that evolutionary purpose. So there's a lot of stuff in there that I thought was really fascinating. But I agree, having training and resources so people can learn about some of these things would be really important to uncover, share, and engage with. And we're in the last half hour, so we'll move to part 3, which Tom brought up, is how can a lot of this apply to what we're doing, either in Catalyst or in any DAOs that we might want to create. I found a lot of the topics congruent with a lot of the goals around decentralization, and we don't have any bosses, and we're trying to create organizational structures that are decentralized and a collective kind of effort towards some goal. How do you all think Teal could apply to that, or help, or provide some kind of guidance? I threw in appendix number 4 from the book here, and I thought it was just really useful to kind of look at as a model of how orange practices transform into teal practices. So if you look at like organizational structure with a hierarchical pyramid, it becomes self-organizing teams. When needed, coaches can step in. There's no management, no profit and loss responsibilities. Coordination in orange organizations is done through fixed meetings at every level, often leading to meeting overload. In teal practice, there's no executive team meetings. Coordination and meetings are mostly ad hoc when needs arise. And it goes through all sorts of stuff. Staff functions were really interesting. Instead of having a plethora of central staff functions like HR, IT, purchasing, finance, controlling, quality, safety, risk management, it's all distributed to teams where they do it themselves. And that's totally what we're seeing in Catalyst with funded stuff. So it makes me wonder, should we be casting a suspicious eye towards teams that are setting themselves up as central staff functions? Maybe it is needed. Maybe teams don't have the capacity to do that themselves. Or should we be really looking into ways of developing that capacity within teams? That's an interesting question, but there's 4 or 5 pages of these kind of things. So I thought it was really interesting to see it all in one place, kind of the book distilled into a few pages of comparison between orange and teal. But yeah, how do you all think this applies to or could be used within Catalyst or within your own groups or DAOs? Dan, you want to start us off?
Yeah, well, I think this theory is amazing. I love thinking about the philosophy behind all this stuff. But like a lot of theory and philosophy, if you don't get it down to practice, it kind of ends up being just in your head. It's like looking at the swimming pool and saying, wouldn't it be nice to jump in? So I like to do this by practicing some of these ideas. And there are 2 organizations I just want to point out that I put down in the mirror board, some links to 2 different companies doing very similar work. They're related in many ways, and I'm working with these people to, they've done their development work based upon teal and holacracy, sociocracy, and these ideas, and they built tools that were actually being used and developed and even being sold now. And I'm trying to bring these kinds of things into DAO structures that we can use and experiment with and bring them into. It's really the best thinking and best implementation of tools that I've seen. And I think we should dive into these things and practice them and play with them and find out what works and what doesn't. So I just wanted to point that out.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think actually doing stuff is really important. And it's great to talk about it, but I love seeing practical examples. That's what I appreciated from the book, is it actually had 12 or more kind of actual case study organizations that have teal practices in various forms. I'd love to hear from Chakan, if he's still here, around Little Fish and what you've been thinking about as far as implementing teal practices into Little Fish.
Yeah, I was just about to up in the conversation. Thank you, Nori. So one problem that popped out as we were building this was, okay, we're going to grow. It's going to be a community-based project. So assuming we grow quite well, let's say we have 20, 50, 100, 150 contributors. As we get to those numbers, it's going to be extremely difficult to keep track of what's going on in the organization. So we feel there's a critical issue that needs to be solved with visibility. And those are some of the issues we're trying to solve right now. But I'd like to focus on just one of them. So just one critical question exists, right? When you come into an organization like this, a DAO, a community, and then what can I do to help? Like that question has been just been asked again, and there's no easy way to really show that in a dynamically changing DAO. If there are tens of people who are contributing to the project, it's very critical for people to be able to see what everybody else is doing and be able to identify what they can do to help. So that's one critical piece of infrastructure I think that's missing. We're trying to solve that internally, with something we're just creating something called work modules, and we're going to try to expand on this idea of how we can make work as transparent as possible. But I think it's one of the key challenges that we have in this space to unlock the great potential of Teal. Because as these communities grow, as these DAOs grow, the evolutionary purpose breakthrough comes into play. With more and more people contributing in different ways, the organization just changes dramatically from what it used to be. In a classical organization, the startup team, they stay the same. Maybe they add a few new guys, maybe they have a new C-level. Sure, the organization changes, but the spirit of it is quite the same. With DAOs, with communities, it absolutely is not. Over time, the core team will change. They will probably leave. Over time, the community will take charge and the organism will really come alive. But the thing is, like, the organism needs to be aware of its surroundings. And those are some of the critical problems that I'm seeing that we're trying to solve with homemade experiments at Little Fish.
Awesome. Thanks, Shakan.
Thank you.
What else do people think are ways that we can apply this or challenges we need to overcome? I can kick off one thing. I've been in a number of conversations with people over time around how do you know, it's similar to what you just mentioned, Shakan, is how do you know what people are doing where, or what are all the organizations involved in Cardano, and how many are doing impact related stuff, or how many are doing environmental related stuff. And we have a blockchain that we can publish metadata to. And if we collectively, or somebody came up with a good metadata model, each organization could on their own just publish their organizational metadata to the chain. And then we could be querying that. Somebody could build out a number of different interfaces to slice and dice and display and model that information. I know Felix is working on something with Jonathan with Swarm Labs as a visualization model. But what if we just had everything on chain, and then anybody could create their own visualization, or they could slice it in any way they needed to uncover the groups, organizations, and individuals that are working in areas that they're interested in. Our blockchain has a lot of stuff that we could use. So that's one area that I've been kind of brainstorming around right now, is how do we come up with a good metadata standard to self-publish what you're about so people can find you. But yeah, Thibaut.
I really like the ground like grouped up that the structure comparison, and it really actually helps me to think beyond what the downsides of having like very open environments. because one of the biggest risks I feel like we are facing is that if we get out there into a powerful, like people who already know that stuff and they see that the network evolving, they can like kind of ruin the incentives for us because we are not self-emerging. But then again, like if we are internally like building our family, like we talked about back in there, like making sure the people we let in are kind of understand the purpose and kind of creating our own system based on that and awareness of that system in place would, I think, would be like very amazing, because we never had the opportunity to put it out there, like Nora said, into the world, and trusting the technology to onboard the purpose and also like give it like transfer it. And now, yeah, using these models, we could do it scientifically on technology, which is now kind of measurable. We don't have the tools for that yet, but we are moving there. And like these experiments we are having all over the network, like look at these people. When I see a face, I see like so many projects behind it with so much different impact I'm not even aware of, because I don't have even time to go into details what they're working on. But yeah, cool.
Thanks, Teuvo.
Yeah. Yeah, I can jump on to the side of that, because I think that gets into that idea of complexity, and that these new teal organizations where, and I guess the scaling, whereas the past, they didn't have to deal with this much data or information, and the scaling, it seems like there's an arrow of like those previous, red, amber, orange, green, they sort of fit the context of what was happening on the planet at the time, and they were necessary, and they were kind of in that evolutionary, they sort of fit the niche. And now we're moving into a new niche with all these tools and technologies, ways of interacting that just weren't there 20 years ago. This just doesn't happen. And so now new organizations, new models, new things, new tools are being, emerging and being called for. Now here's the stick, is that the old systems will hang on, and I'm not in a conspiratorial way. It's just in my own brain, like I want to fall back onto the thing. Yeah, that's my point.
Mm-hmm. But even as you mentioned yourself, Newman, earlier, each previous level has things that it contributes that is beneficial and positive. So how do we avoid it turning to the negative manifestations and continue the positive manifestations all along, while other parts evolve into green, teal, and beyond? And just before I hand it over to Chuck, I was just looking at the major organizational processes here around purpose. And one of the things listed here is everyone's a sensor, which made me laugh, because if the Catalyst Circle's purpose is to be a sensor array, maybe this is the next stage, is we just decentralize so far that we're all that sensor, and teal can kind of bring that together. But anyway, Chakan.
This idea of older models staying in our heads, I've experienced it several times with myself and with others I'm working with. It's, you explain it, you say it, we self-manage, you decide what you do, But then when other people talk about it, it's like, what do you want me to do? Always it's going to that same cycle of, our brains are wired that way, like we learned it that way. And I think really we need a way of unlearning that and learning this new paradigm. So if you have any links, any knowledge about how we do that, I think it's one of the main challenges of this. I would love some information on that topic.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Chakan. I think, yeah, we've all experienced that on our journey too. And just before Jem jumps in, maybe you all work on the concept of ikigai, and that might be one pathway to that, is to really discover what your ikigai is. And then maybe you naturally stop asking, what do I do next? It's just, I do my ikigai and move forward with that. But yeah, Jem, your hand's up.
Yeah, thank you, Nori. I can say that I'm coming from a pyramid scheme organization. I was a boss for several, maybe more than 20 years. And at that times, we had the commands, we had the order, and we have the time. So we were ordering to the personnel to do something about the work that has to be done. In teal organizations, I can say that there should be a purpose for all of them, all the individuals in the system. And instead of order, I see that love, passion, and working comes. So we need to change our minds to that ideology. And I think this way the system can work, because we all need a purpose in the first hand.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, Steve.
Yeah, something Chakan was just saying about the, trying not to use some of the older models from the past, and I'm all about that. However, if we could make everything in the world, like the physical things that happen and the feelings and all of that, if we could say that all of that was language, right? And then think about how a kid learns how to speak, right? They don't speak correctly. They're mimicking what you say. Like if you're around a little kid at that age, when they start speaking, they're mimicking what you say, right? They're using the patterns from the past that you've projected onto this kid, because that's the way you have to communicate. And that's what the kid has to communicate. And we don't make fun of kids, right? When they say the words wrong, or they don't articulate it correctly, we don't make fun of them. And yet they still learn how to get better with language, right? Use words in their own combinations. And my thoughts about this are really coming from my experience with music, and that's how I was taught how music should really be taught, right? That you just approach it as a child, and you do the best you can. And if you're lucky, you're hanging out with other musicians who aren't going to make fun of you, right? You're not going to be playing music with a bunch of musician bullies, right? They're just going to encourage you in the same way that we encourage children, right? And the new forms will come out of the old forms. And I think it's a really stressful to not think from your own past, right? Because that's all you have, right? There's this now, and you can live in this space that it's eternal, because it is eternal. But this now is being informed by your past. And it's not that you have to repeat it, but it's okay for it to inform you. That's basically what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Steve. Aaron, and then Zoe.
Thanks, Nori. I wish to comment about the phenomena of us getting for new structure of organization with the old way of thinking. It's natural, it's inevitable, but also it could be dangerous. We should be aware of the danger of this kind of approach, because this mismatch between the ways that the organization act, work, and the ways that we think of how organization can work can create also a damage. It can leverage the tragedy of the common goods. If someone in self-organization, self-organized organization, someone comes with his own interest, it can take over a lot of labor of many people. This is tragedies that I think here in Israel, where I live, we have the kibbutzim, some kind of a very utopistic way of organizing and living that started in the beginning of the last century. And when it's collapsed, it's been taken over by people with their own interest. So we have to be very aware of the ways that we look on things with our past perspective, as Steve mentioned, and how we do it. Well, it's up to each one of us, but I can testify from my own experience, is that one of the best tools that I've been using, best practices I've been using to see the thing as they are and not treat them with the old pattern in my mind, is mindfulness and meditation. Because when you're practicing watching your own thought and separate your own self from thought, you can build some good skill of identifying when your pattern are not relevant to the current reality. So there are many other practices that can achieve this goal. This is my own way of looking at it, but still, just to being aware of the danger of treating this new way of organizing with the old pattern of our thinking.
Thanks, Aaron. I think that's a really great point. Zoe, and then Stephen.
What I see very much in this is spiral dynamics, and this is it's basically the same just for consciousness, humanity as a species, and what I see in here is that the book thinks on how could this apply to organizations, whatever that might be. And I feel like we will get there anyways. But what I again want to emphasize is that if that's top down and just if an organization just cherry picks stuff, like also Stephen hinted to that with if some corporations, if they say your family, they just mean to pay you less. I really want to raise this concern of if stuff gets cherry picked here, and on the other hand, I feel like we will get there and organizations will change, just because how we organize as humanity changes all the time. And now it's getting to globalization, and it will go back to acting more localized, or it is already again going back, and we always have this going back and forth, but at the same time moving forward, just like the solar system does. I think that's a nice analogy, but that's my thoughts. And thanks for the session. It was very interesting.
Thanks, Zoe. And yeah, one thing I found interesting in the book is it was all about organizations that changed to teal, and there was a lot of emphasis around getting support from the CEO and the executive team, as well as the board of directors. And that kind of made me wonder about it, but also be hopeful about our kind of community, because we don't have a board of directors or a CEO necessarily. We're trying to undo that and try to assemble as a community. So maybe we can avoid the top-down cherry picking and let things organically evolve in different areas and see what works and share what works and do all that. But yeah, Stephen.
Hi, Norris. Sorry, my connection's a bit ropey. So thanks for doing this book. It's been really interesting, and I've been following it for a while, partly because it was recommended reading for the DREPs. So I thought I've started doing detailed notes of this, and it's into 3 sections, and there are very different parts to it. There's some interesting case studies in one part, as you know. And then towards the end, there's sort of some stuff about holacracy, and that's about where I'm up to. About 90% of it, I completely disagree with it, and it's completely wrong. I think it's full of logical fallacies and wishful thinking. But I still think it's a valuable book. The fallacies include historical fallacies, the idea that there's progress in history. I don't think there is progress in history. I don't believe in human progress. I don't think life has a progress, and I think it assumes human perfectibility. I'm a fallibist. I believe that humans are fallible. They cannot be perfected. And actually to say that humans can be perfected is dangerous. Perhaps also the requirement for training, it also suggests coaching for people. So people are actually coached in these methods. It's not something that will come, it is a kind of adopted behavior. It's interesting how this book and the methodology and the kind of tropes in it are fitting in with this community. So I'll also say, is it appropriate to apply the scientific concept of evolution to history? Because evolution is a much wider concept, and it's not supposed to be applied to history. So when it is applied to history, it can only be applied to history as an analogy. There's things like Hegelian ideas, like of Aufhebung, that every paradigm includes and transcends the previous. There's been a whole wealth of 20th century and material just criticizing that, saying that's a logical fallacy. It is contradictory. I also think the way that it presents inner rightness as a compass is quite narcissistic. I sort of because I believe in human fallibilism, I come to a completely opposite direct conclusion. Internal yardsticks are not the index of experience. It's outside experience. It's outside people's relationship with outside people and the community that's important. Like people if you read writers like Martin Buber, I and Thou, it's all about the relationship with other people. It's not about you. Life is a journey of unfolding. Disagree with that statement completely. Ultimate goals are beyond us. We never reach an truth or authenticity or self-knowledge. That is just kind of wishful thinking for me. And I think it has a kind of slight connotation of do what you will. So, that's my view on that. But it's a really interesting book and has really cool elements to it in terms of the case studies in the middle and the end where it talks about holacracy, and this is influencing IOG and the community. So I think, that's interesting. So thanks, Laurie.
Thanks, Stephen. And yeah, I appreciate those viewpoints, because it is really easy to just jump on and go, oh my God, this resonates and it's so great. But yeah, it's just one model and might not even be right. One thing I noticed here though is kind of red is all about me. Amber goes into we. Orange again goes into me. It's about self-achievement and all that. Green goes into we, which means teal is back to I again, about me. And the individual and how the individual grows and unfolds. So maybe beyond teal, there's another kind of, how do we shift from self-involvement, self-taming our own ego back to we again? And is that something that's coming in the future? I don't think that's mentioned anywhere, but that's kind of one of the patterns that I saw. And I think you kind of alluded to that. Yeah. We need to get.
I should actually be a bit more charitable. It's because of that's kind of like the philosophical analysis of it. But I think you can see the book as a kind of more playfully, okay, as a kind of journey, like so, and I like reading things I even disagree with. For me that's fine. And as you say, Nori, you can take that and say, okay, take this as like a game or a pattern of thought and work out how you can play with those ideas and use it like a shamanistic journey or a soul journey or something like that. It doesn't have to, it can be read on different levels. You know, so my criticism was part of my criticism I just made before was some of it was analytic, because a lot of this comes from the phenomenological tradition in philosophy, which I'm skeptical of, frankly. So, but you don't, and we don't have to read it that way. I'm just saying. So I just because I disagree with it, it doesn't mean it's not a good book.
Thanks, Stephen. And I saw in chat somewhere, I think Felix or somebody said we should have a philosophical book club. So maybe that's kind of the next evolution we go. So because some of these topics are really fascinating.
And I just want to give the kudos to Stephen. And we haven't really hung out, but of course I've seen you quite a bit around. I want to recognize and how refreshing it is that you can disagree and pretty strongly and very eloquently without any kind of rancor or like upset. I think that it says something to your philosophical sort of mindset, and it's just beautiful and refreshing. I do want to make one point because I know some other people want to talk, and I love both the people that are about to talk. That the rightness as compass. Now, this did trigger a thing for me because when I was younger, I've had very, very adamant views that were completely, I don't want to say wrong, but just would steer me in the wrong. I'm not a big right or wrong guy, but they steer me in a totally different direction than I would go now. So that, yeah, no, I just wanted to make that point and to say thank you.
Thanks, Newman. Check on and then CMOS.
To your point, Nori, talking about the levels going from I to we, I to we, this maps out quite well with the spiral dynamics model Zoe was talking about. With this, comparing the two models, I see some differences. I think it was based on the spiral dynamics model, but doesn't follow completely. So going from I to V, I think the parallels are there. I think the model will continue, but looking at teal, I see both I and V. Like it's not the same. It's not continuing in that IV model, but rather if we looked at the spiral dynamics level 2, that would be yellow and turquoise. I think teal, as it is presented here, incorporates both of those. So we have wholeness, we have self-management. Those are personal. Those are personal things. Those are the individual taking charge of what they're doing and doing it at a much higher level. I kind of feel like a good teal model working with a really good self-management and wholeness kind of feels like everybody is the founder of this organization, like a founder of a startup. But evolutionary purpose, I feel it's more a communal breakthrough. I think it is together with everybody's work together results in that evolutionary purpose and the evolutionary purpose of that organization. I think there we have more of a communal role. So here I feel like maybe there should be a step below this teal, but I think like we're just beginning to understand what teal is. Like this book is just a very first step. So maybe in time we'll get to understand this model a lot better.
Awesome. Thanks, Jakan. CMOS.
Yeah, about teal organizations. So I'm looking at these cards, I'm thinking to myself, my instinct is to say, well, I really don't like the notion of corporations kowtowing to, well, let's say in one context, millennials, because they can't hire, like nobody else to hire. But I did also say earlier that for like for an organization to run smoothly, it must be modeled with it must be modeled by keeping in mind certain inevitabilities of human behavior, and that is analogous to these teal cards.
Mm-hmm.
Say it again.
So you have situations where companies want to be contemporary, so they may give in to particular demands
Okay.
that might not have been tolerated in more draconian organizations. In other words, it would suck that an organization's efficiency would have to suffer because it must employ at least a percentage of people that are too self-serving, for the system to actually work. On the other hand, all of these teal cards are analogous to the other thing I said, that human behavior is inevitable, and uh, for an organization to survive, it has to make certain like humble acknowledgments about how human beings behave, how they like to be treated, and in what context they're most efficient and whatnot.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I see a lot of like COVID has forced a lot of companies to go full remote. And then now they're trying to get people to come back. And what was unthinkable before became the norm. And now people don't want to go back to before because they found that their lives are richer, they're more productive in certain cases. And it's a much more effective way of working. I think these are all kind of shifts and changes and becoming more human, recognizing that like I'm in the meetings and I've seen children, I've seen pets, I've seen all sorts of stuff, and it's all normal because before we would have been like, remember at the very beginning of COVID, you had that CNN guy being interviewed and his little kid comes walking into the room and he's trying to struggle to shut the door and the wife comes in and pulls him out and stuff. It's like, that was the old way. We were embarrassed about including our wholeness, our life. And now you'll see children sitting on laps and dogs and pets and everything, and our whole self is showing up. So those are like shifts to teal that I'm seeing that are really positive, that help changing us from cogs into just kind of part of we're able to show up as we are.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a dick in this respect. I think it's distracting. I think to myself, like, the ideal meeting should look like a Resident Evil corporate board meeting.
Nice.
Is that the one where they like they put people through some crazy like experiment and like slice them up or something?
No, it's just a very plain room, and like the heads of each facility like beam into their tables.
Okay. Yeah.
Nin, we'll take maybe one final comment because we're at 90 minutes and I don't want the recording to go too long for people that are watching this after the fact. But we can keep continuing afterwards if we want.
I'll be super short then. Yeah, I think one of the amazing things that came out of COVID was remote work, right? To me, it's so much easier and better. And we're fully remote. We have people across the world, right? Talent is everywhere. Why limit yourself to one location? It is so much easier to get people together, right? Once a year, twice a year, 4 times a year. And then you have this outpouring of love and energy, and also you receive energy from others that you've only worked with and interacted with online. And that makes a lot of the relationships meaningful, and just being remote just allows people to be themselves too, right? Talking about teal and bringing your whole self to work, right? We're still experimenting.
You know who is really himself at work? Jeffrey Toobin. Nobody gets that joke. Jeffrey, look up Jeffrey Toobin CNN Zoom call and you'll get it.
Oh, Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. This was a really great conversation. And I'm glad that we had a mix of people who've read the book, didn't read the book, are curious, people who just showed up at Swarm and found something new. Yeah, there is a book club going on. And I thank everybody for your participation. I just kind of zoomed out on our Miro board. Look what we co-created together. That's awesome. So please utilize it, use the links, dive deeper. Start conversations around Teal if that's something that you are moved to do. And yeah, thanks for participating. This board will be shut down to comment only in the next little while, but feel free to come back, add comments, add notes, and if you have stuff you want to add, it'll be open for a little while longer to add different resources. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining. It's been really great. And
Thanks a lot, Nori.
and we'll do, oh yeah, just as a kind of a marketing thing, we have 2 more slots. This was a funded proposal for me to do 6 books. So we have 2 more to go. So I'll go on to the Telegram group and poll people for what you want to do for the last 2. I am on vacation for the next 30 days. So we'll probably do the next one sometime the first week or 2 of August. So just to set expectations, you'll have a nice long time to read the next book, whichever it is. All right, thanks everybody. And we'll pause the recording here.